the captions or whatever, the memes. It can't stop me because it's a vision that I have and it's goals that I have that I set out for myself that I got to get there no matter what.
Okay, y'all, what's up? Welcome to my channel. My name is Tiffany, and I have these two books that were written by my cousin. He used to be a correctional officer in the Baltimore City Detention Center. This is a true story, obviously. I'm pretty sure a lot of y'all heard about this story. Tavon White, he impregnated like 4 different correctional officers. So I spoke to Cuz and I asked him, I said, hey Cuz, is the true story of the BCDC the story and the indictments the aftermath of the same story? He said yes. Right after I retired in 2012, everyone started getting indicted in 2013. He says that BCDC was a crazy survival war zone. They shut it down in 2015 because of the dilapidated conditions and the corruption. It was built in 1859, 2 years before the Civil War. And so I've obviously already read this book. But after we read this one, if y'all want to, we can get into that one as well. This book, however, we are going to read together. You can see how brand new, fresh out the mail it is. I'm so excited to get into it, y'all. This is going to be a really good book. I just know it. I guess I should put a disclaimer in here. This is going to be some very, very raw, graphic content. It's not for kids. It's not for anybody with a weak stomach. It's not for anybody that don't want to hear about any, I don't even know. I can't even imagine what's in this book. I can't even imagine. So I can't even warn you. Okay. If that sounds like something that you might not want to hear about, all types of crazy, disgusting, corrupt, scandalous things that go on behind the prison walls, this is your time to exit out, because I'm not sugarcoating. I'm going to read the book just how he wrote it. So there's the disclaimer. All right. So I'm going to get into the back of the book. The back of the book goes, to escape the seductive, dangerous allure of the 80s crack epidemic, I sought refuge in the Army for 8 years. When I unceremoniously returned back to Baltimore, I ended up facing 23 years in prison for some shit the narcs insisted was mine. Miraculously, my fortunes took an unlikely twist. Instead of joining the ranks of the guilty before proving innocent, I became a CO, aka a correctional officer, at one of America's most violent, corrupt jails, the Baltimore City Jail, aka Baltimore City Detention Center. Never in a million years did I think I would end up on the wrong side of the law, aka the right side. With the new spin on life, I entered into a subculture governed by predatory values and unimaginable violence. Unwittingly, I ventured into an arena where everyone I met was the opposite of who they said they were. In this dungeon of despair, disputes were resolved at the end of a shank. My journey in corrections led me into a chaotic trenches of human captivity where COs were the absolute law, whenever they weren't breaking it. At times, you couldn't tell who belonged behind the keys or behind the bars. Though corruption was off the rack, fuck the hook, there were many examples of extraordinary courage exhibited by law enforcement's unsung warriors who put their lives on the line daily to maintain control. In a place where hope is an unproven theory, I stumbled upon the big picture, corporate America's best-kept money-making secret, black male incarceration. Located in Baltimore's infamous East Side, the Baltimore City Jail is an iconic eyesore that is the end result of illiteracy, selfishness, betrayal, violence, gluttony, and exploitation. From the mean streets to the unforgiving world of concrete and steel, my turbulent journey in the jail has exposed me to the constant stress that comes with the territory of being a CO. Yet, in the midst of so much melancholy, humor can jump out and grab you as quick as a mind-boggling tragedy. Engulfed with so much insight, I was compelled to unleash my pen and write about the widespread corruption that encourages lawbreaking instead of law enforcement. CO is my personal story of anger, violence, confusion, and finally enlightenment. Behind the concrete walls and barbed wire fences, I managed to do what very few have done: spend my entire career at the Baltimore City Jail and survive corruption, betrayal, prison, lunacy, and death to retire and tell my story. And I just want to read y'all this little note that my cousin wrote for me. It says, "To my cousin Tiffany, I wish you much success in all your endeavors. Ralphie Johnson Jr." Thank you, cousin. When you first open it, it's just the same picture that is on the cover here. We got some special thanks here. I guess we can get into that. Besides God, first and foremost, special thanks to David Hubert, the first black turnkey, aka CO, hired at the jail in 1947. Geneva Saltus, the first black female CO hired in 1955. Lawrence Logan, the first black supervisor, aka lieutenant, in 1966. Charles Harris, one of the first black sergeants, promoted in 1967. Lawrence Logan and Herbert B. Parker, the first black captains, promoted in 1972. Guy Smith, the jail's first black major. Calvin A. Lightfoot, the jail's first black warden, appointed in 1979. And Barbara Bostic, the first black female commissioner, appointed in 1988. I salute these courageous groundbreakers for overcoming the barriers of racism and inequality. They upheld the creed and integrity of decency in an environment that had neither. They fought their asses off to maintain control and order of some of society's worst human beings. This is their story as well. Special thanks to Lieutenant Tamara B. Patterson for editing my manuscript of over 500 pages and her vast amount of knowledge of the jail, to Cora Weems for her networking contribution and supplying me with vital information about former COs. Thanks to everyone who made the completion of this book possible. Thanks to all COs who subject themselves to subculture of anarchy based off predatory values. Armed only with bravery, commitment, and character, I have a great amount of respect for the unsung officers of law enforcement who are constantly fighting a losing battle, but are determined to win the battle of perseverance within. Special thanks to Burnett Little, who told me a long time ago to never stop writing. Special thanks to Dr. Morgan, a Jamaican political exile who I met in Germany. He told me to close my eyes and imagine that I was successful, to visualize that I was in the majesty of greatness where people applauded my righteous efforts and greatness would come upon me. 29 years later, I finally listened to his advice. All right, we're getting into, I don't know how to say this. Is it the prelude, the prelude? I never know. Let's get into it. I remember when Mayor Schmoke tried to mindfuck Baltimoreans into thinking Baltimore was the city that reads, when everyone knows it's the city that bleeds. I don't know if he was trying to take our minds off of the culture of horrific violence or trick us into thinking we were what we weren't. But being a native of East Baltimore, I was within walking distance of the city's two iconic eyesores, the infamous Maryland State Penitentiary, aka the Pen, and the notorious Baltimore City Jail, aka Courtside. I knew that our first elected mayor's slogan was bullshit because more people were visiting these two institutions of lower learning than the libraries, which were ironically shut down in the inner city because of lack of funds. The thought of going to Courtside or the Pen brought terror to my heart. Yet, I was fascinated with the practice of locking people in cages like animals. The thought of someone confined in an area the size of a bathroom was horrifyingly intriguing to me, especially if the person had a cellmate, decreasing the space. When my mother punished me and sentenced me to a few days to my bedroom, the claustrophobic atmosphere literally drove me crazy. I would jump out of the second floor window and run away to freedom a few blocks away to my friend Kenneth Oakley's house. I used to ride my 10-speed bike in front of the pen to watch the spectacle of captives as if I was at the zoo watching ferocious lions and bears from a safe distance. At night, when the interior prison lights shine bright, you could literally see the convicts walk up and down the tiers. Once they spotted me, they would yell out obscenities in a form of self-amusement. Some even offered advice by yelling, "This ain't for you, shorty. Stay your bitch ass out there. Boy, you come up in here, I'ma fuck the shit out of you." Goddamn. Stay in school, young fella. Do something with your life. It was amazing to me how these men maintained their sanity locked behind bars for what seemed like forever. Later on, I discovered that it was their insanity that actually kept them functioning. As I got older, one of the main reasons I visited the walls of the pen was because I wanted to study these men. I wanted to learn prison jargon, how they thought, how they reacted in crisis. These things were important to me because where I came from, going to jail was a rite of passage. At some point in life, I knew my path would lead to incarceration, so I wanted to be prepared. The thought of spending time in prison as anything other than a convict never crossed my mind. Working as a turnkey, as it was called when I was growing up, was the equivalent to being a police officer. Who in their right fucking mind wanted to be the police? Trust me, that wasn't on anybody's "that's what I want to be when I grow up" list. As predicted, I lived up to the stereotype and was locked up a few times for assault and arguing with the police. My incarceration didn't earn me any street notoriety, so I decided to pursue the next best fantasy, a career in basketball. Rap wasn't popular yet. The stereotypical fantasy of pursuing a professional basketball career while saying fuck school didn't bring me the illustrious results I had envisioned. If it wasn't for my basketball coach, Mr. Harrell, giving me the guidance that I needed to rise above my stupidity, I would have fallen victim to my misguided priorities. However, the wisdom he poured into my brain had a lot of sinister competition. The gangster Peanut King was not only recruiting young kids my age into his drug empire, he was buying all of the kids that worked for him a moped. After dropping out of school, broke and a crumb snatcher on the way, the allure of fast drug money looked very attractive. Thank God for Mr. Harrell's guidance and my mother's foot up my ass, which kept the drug game at bay. The final nail in the coffin, or bullet in the head, that convinced me that the drug game was a fool's trap was when my homeboy Michi, who worked for Peanut King, was found murdered. This was enough to spoil my appetite for the ghetto's version of the American dream. I followed my mother to the Army recruiting station on Howard Street as if she was Harriet Tubman leading me the fuck out of Baltimore through the Underground Railroad. For 8 years, I found refuge in the Army until I unceremoniously returned to Baltimore, discovering nearly all of my friends were dead, in jail, or irreversibly fucked up. In the process of trying to build a life back home in Charm City, the C in Charm is silent, I found out the guards were no longer called turnkeys. Inmates referred to them as COs, aka correctional officers. How did I know this? Because my dumbass had gotten locked up. Over the years, the term CO had been ingrained in the African American community. Since African Americans play a major role in the business of crime in America, both in law enforcement and as lawbreakers, the term CO is right up there with 5-0, Feds, NARC, DEA, ATF, FBI, and any other acronyms that pop up out of the blue to join the big business of black male mass incarceration, aka contemporary slavery. What you are about to read is my turbulent yet enlightening journey through the penal system by the way of Baltimore City Jail, currently known as Baltimore City Detention Center. It's not a journey behind the bars, but behind the keys. Never in a million years did I think I would end up on the wrong side of the law, aka the right side. Nevertheless, my journey consisted of many disappointments, yet many lifelong lessons. It's a path under normal circumstances I would have never taken. Yet, after taking it, I have no regrets. However, when I started writing this book, I discovered that I still had pent-up feelings of anger, bitterness, disdain, and hatred because of so many fucked up memories. To be honest, after finishing this book, some emotions remain. I poignantly thought about how I wanted to articulate my emotions through words. I wanted to articulate my story in a manner that reflected intelligence. I didn't want to appear angry or as another nigger from East Baltimore that had no respect for the King's English. I wanted to be politically correct. But the more I wrote, the more I felt hypocritical and phony because nothing is politically correct about the Baltimore City Jail. I decided to simply express the truth in its purest form, for better or for worse. My intentions are to give the reader a clear picture of the fear and anxiety that overcame me when I was faced with life and death situations while walking down filthy, rat-infested tiers. I wanted the reader to feel the pain I felt constantly being betrayed by the people I trusted. Through my words, I wanted the reader to experience the hurt and anguish that had engulfed me, losing comrades to drug overdose, suicide, murder, incarceration, and lunacy. It was no way I could restrain my mind from unleashing words that most people hold hostage in their hearts. I wanted the reader to feel the homicidal rage that inspired me to put forth my greatest effort to try and permanently damage motherfuckers mentally, physically, and spiritually for putting their hands on my mother's only son, me. I felt that it was paramount that I used the rawest of words to express the hate that ran through my blood for crooked officers who conspired against me because I didn't approve of them selling drugs, cigarettes, uptown knives, pussy, and any other contraband of value. It was no way I could refer to the King's English when describing the desperation and panic that saturated my mind when I fought like hell for the safety of my comrades and myself. All of the murders, ass whoopings, hangings, and broken dreams that occurred behind the concrete walls and barbed wire fences have left sour memories in my mind, so I wasn't about to sugarcoat shit. I even hated the words correctional facility, which is nothing but a euphemism for the ugly words jail and prison. Things are not going to get better by giving them nice titles. Whichever way you say feces, it still smells like shit. For the sake of the raw truth, I decided to abandon the King's English and tell politically correct to kiss my ass. My intentions aren't to overdose on profanity or sabotage my literacy, but to tell the truth exactly the way I experienced it. I equate a CO to a soldier on the battlefield that experiences so much trauma that after a while, their brain automatically goes into survival mode, causing them to do whatever is necessary for self-preservation, even things unimaginable. A lot of people come into corrections already fucked up and confused like I was, and somehow make it work. There are others who come into corrections well-educated, good work ethics, and family values that will make the Huxtables say, damn, they got it good. Unfortunately, a lot of these people end up smuggling contraband into the jail. They become gang members, hustlers, COs, gangsters, and sex objects for the sexually deprived, like soldiers on a gruesome battlefield. Some COs suffer from their own version of post-traumatic syndrome, stupidity, and greed. In a jail setting, forget trying to tell a book by its cover. You can never tell who's brave or who's a bitch, who's your friend, or who's trying to put that thing in your back, who's going to uphold the law and who's going to break it, who's going to retire and who's going to end up in jail. What I can honestly say is that everybody's guilty of something. It's the nature of the environment. It takes a very strong person to hold it together simply to maintain a resemblance of decency. I truly respect all COs who subject themselves to a subculture of anarchy based on predatory values, armed only with the bravery, commitment, and character. I have a great amount of respect for the unsung officers of law enforcement who are constantly fighting a losing battle but are determined to win the battle of self-respect within. Those who have never entered institutions of criminal learning will come to the conclusion that my experiences in this book are exaggerated, outlandish tall tales, and ridiculous lies. I assure you that those who have been locked up or worked at the Baltimore City Jail, aka BCDC, will confirm the legitimacy of the crazy shit you are about to read. Like my man Lieutenant A. Livingston used to say, these stories are not made up. Dating back to its inauguration in 1859, the Baltimore City Jail had a very brutal racist history. Just to give you an idea of how old it is, the year the doors opened for business, the 15th President James Buchanan was in office, and the Civil War was 2 years away. That's an old motherfucker. Not to mention, slavery in Baltimore was still legal, lynching was a spectator sport, and the two main crimes committed by black people were learning to read and escaping from bondage. It's no accident when you walk through the Baltimore City Jail, an institution that can confine 3,000 plus inmates, you can bust a blood vessel in your brain trying to find a white person. Sadly, but statistically speaking, jails in America are built for the economic underclass who are targeted for purposes of exploitation. There are many books such as The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, Slavery by Another Name by Douglas A. Blackman, and Black Robes, White Justice by Bruce White, to name a few, that can support my claim. More importantly, I worked in the system for 18 plus years. I can bear witness to the truth my damn self. I'm not talking philosophically, theoretically, or hypothetically. I'm talking what the fuck I lived. The Baltimore City Jail is a microcosm of jails and prisons throughout America. Statistically, it's blatantly disrespectful how much we are overwhelmingly represented in the prison system compared to the populated majority in America. Out of 300 plus million Americans, there are approximately 38 million African Americans. Out of the 300 plus million, there are over 200 million white Americans. And you mean to tell me blacks overwhelmingly outpopulate whites in the prison system? Are you fucking kidding me? I know there are some wretched, evil black motherfuckers out there that needs to be buried under the jail, but this shit is ridiculous. According to the numbers alone, if justice was truly blind, it should be at least 3 times as many whites in jail than blacks. Not because one race is worse than the other, but because most Americans have this entitlement complex that we should possess shit without hard work. So we break law. We as Americans, white, black, brown, yellow, and red, have a fast food overnight success mentality. Fuck tomorrow. We want success now. For many Americans to achieve immediate gratification, breaking law is what we do. If all Americans were penalized equally for the crimes they have committed, based on the numbers alone, the jail and prisons would be flooded with white people singing, "We shall overcome." Our greatest symbol of justice and morality is Lady Justice, which derives from the ancient Egyptian goddess, which represents good counsel and embodies divine order, law, and custom. Lady Justice is the personification of balancing the scales of justice. She wears a blindfold that represents objectivity of justice without fear or favor, regardless of identity, money, power, or weakness. Lady Justice is also depicted as carrying a double-edged sword in her left hand, symbolizing the power of reason and justice, which may have to be used against any party. Well, I guess our version of Lady Justice in America said fuck the blindfold and started swinging her double-edged blade at black people. There's nothing blind about Lady Justice. The bitch has 20/20. She sees exactly what she's doing. She picks and chooses who she wants to give justice to. As far as she sees it, black is synonymous with crime. If you study the history of slavery in America, you will not find any historical accounts of slaves robbing, stealing, raping, or murdering one another as a common practice of corruption. Slaves never exhibited corrupt behavior to the extent that jails had to be built to separate law-breaking slaves from society. So if slaves conducted themselves with civilized decency under the lowest human conditions possible, why would they wait until they were free to start doing home invasions on plantations? They bled, suffered, and died for hundreds of years to get the fuck out of master's house. Why would they break back into the motherfucker? At the height of the slave population, there were 4 million desperate, dirt poor, angry slaves, and crime was never a major issue. This notion that black people are born with criminal tendencies was made up during Reconstruction to create a negative image of the ex-slave, to start a new chapter of slavery for the purpose of free labor. When the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, the slaves were freed. Because they wanted to be paid for their labor, they were looked upon as a bunch of ornery, conniving, deceitful, corrupt, lazy-ass niggas who complained too much about equal rights. First of all, if they were lazy, America would have never been built. The fact of the matter was that legal slaves could no longer be forced to do labor, an unbearable reality that put America's financial empire in jeopardy. Some malicious scheme had to be devised to restore the practice of involuntary servitude so America could maintain its economic might. Prior to the end of slavery and afterwards, corruption was never a part of the slave community. So where did this criminal behavior in the black community come from? Crime was manufactured in the black community for the sole purpose of satisfying America's addiction to free labor. Let me explain. The answer to free labor was found in the 13th Amendment, the very document that freed the slaves. The first section of the 13th Amendment reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subjected to their jurisdiction." In layman's terms, the shit means ex-slaves could legally be forced to do free labor again if they were convicted of a crime. Bingo! The loophole was, except as a punishment for a crime. The criminal element was born. Overnight in the black community, and involuntary servitude became a national pastime again for black people. The initial process of creating the black criminal element in America was the establishment of racist laws called black codes. These laws were enacted mainly in the southern states to restrict the movement of blacks and regulated what they could or couldn't do. Blacks could not become literate, assemble amongst themselves, speak freely, and were bound under law to obey white people. If blacks were too mouthy or uppity, they were beaten, hung, or locked up. The black codes were laws not only designed to get free labor out of tens of thousands of black men through the prison system, but to constantly remind black people of their place in society, which was subordinate to white people. To justify the mass incarceration of black men legally, a campaign of propaganda was put into effect to vilify the black man by labeling him mischievous, deviant in nature, ungrateful, barbaric, and pure predatory. It was driven in the minds of Americans that the only ambitions of the newly freed, sex-crazed black men was to rape a white woman and break law whenever they weren't somewhere tap dancing or buffooning around. The former masters and business owners were determined to prove that these untamed creatures from Africa should have never been freed from civilized captivity. It wasn't a matter of right or wrong, slavery or freedom. It was about money. Who else were going to harvest the plantations, work in the steel mills, coal mines, etc.? Since the ex-slaves had a good, hard-working record, never took a day off, always on time, and excellent references from former bosses, aka masters, he was hired on the spot. Because of the oppressive laws that limited the movement of blacks and the demonization of their character, blacks were forced to rely on their former slave owners and ruthless business owners for their livelihood. Unbeknownst to them, they had fallen victim to the peonage system. The peonage system forced blacks into taking low-wage jobs that didn't enable them to survive without the assistance of their employers, which were often former slave masters. They were given credit on food, shelter, clothing, and other expenses at an astronomical interest rate. This caused them to accumulate insurmountable debts. To work off their debts, black people were forced to do free labor for years. They were forced to stay on the premises of their exploiters until their debts were paid, which in most cases they never were. They were beaten, tortured, and killed if they refused to work. Creditors could even lease these imprisoned men out to the plantation and business owners. When the fat-ass 19th President Rutherford B. Hayes enacted the Jim Crow laws in 1877, this was throwing gasoline onto the fire. What Hayes was basically saying was that black people were inferior to whites and put into place laws to further promote and regulate the brutal mistreatment of black people. Once the president sanctioned the mistreatment of black people, white Americans were inspired to carry on the tradition of despising black people with a sense of superiority. This shit is factual history. Unfucking believable. Needless to say, once blacks got hip to the scheme, they eluded the peonage system by preferring to be homeless and broke. White folks said, "I got something for your ass," and made it to be illegal to be broke. Can you imagine how many fucking jails would have to be built if being broke was illegal today? Some of these begging motherfuckers would get lethal injections. If you were caught up by the police walking around unemployed, you were locked up for vagrancy. Vagrancy was the fucking #1 crime committed by black people in the South. You either accumulated debt and worked for free or unemployed and in prison. This is probably where the saying "between a hard place and a rock" came from. Once convicted of the awful crime of vagrancy, blacks were given fines plus court costs they couldn't pay because they didn't have a fucking job. They were ushered off to prison and were immediately victimized by the convict leasing system. Under the 13th Amendment, criminals could be legally forced to work. The jails and prisons leased the convicts out by tens of thousands to any business that sought after cheap labor. This in turn provided the states with tremendous revenue. Now that the states had their hands deep into the money jar, the practice of black male mass incarceration for the purpose of making a killing was here to stay. To get support by the public and to justify this new form of slavery, there was a campaign of propaganda put into motion to promote the stereotype that black men were synonymous with criminals. One of the most damaging portrayals of the black man's character was in D.W. Griffith's film, Birth of a Nation. It debuted in 1915. It portrayed the black man as naturally prone to violence, sneaky, conniving, treacherous, and would rape a white woman as if it was the criteria for breathing. The movie was so racist and influential, it ignited a deep fear of black men in the psyche of white America, which still exists unto this day. Birth of a Nation was the first motion picture ever shown at the White House. It was during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president. After the premiere, he stated, and I fucking quote, "It is like writing history with lightning, and my only regret is that it is all so terribly true." Here again, another U.S. president endorses racism. I don't want to hear that's how it was. This wasn't during a time when it was prestigious for the U.S. presidents to have slaves. He said this shit during World War I, when blacks were about to go to fucking war and die for America. Black men have been ostracized from society and typecast as criminals for so long, we began to believe that criminal activity is our only way to human dignity and successful achievement. If someone tells you you are something long enough, you begin to believe it. Then you try to live up to that image. Negativity is the image that's attached to the black man in America, and we literally kill ourselves and each other trying to live up to the anti-hero role we have learned to cherish. To hide the guilt of our own demise, we have mastered the art of blaming the white man. That's why so many black people can wake up in the morning without a conscience, scratch their ass, puff on some loud, then race out the house and break the law, not once considering brushing their teeth or washing their ass. Blaming is a culture of thinking that stifles our growth and gives us justifiable excuse for failure. We have been on the wrong side of history since we were dragged here. However, part of the reason we remain on the wrong side of history is because there are too many self-centered, individualistic, it's all about me, ratchet motherfuckers that care more about self than the community. The truth of the matter is that we are complicit in a lot of our own misfortunes today. Just because we were dealt a bad hand doesn't give us the right to disrespect, abuse, sell poison to our children, murder, and sell each other out. The white man doesn't hold your hand while you pull the trigger and blow another black man's brains out. The white man doesn't put poison in your hand so you can litter the black community with death. The white man didn't impregnate your woman. You did. So he doesn't owe you or her shit. Stop complaining about the white man. Stop complaining about your father wasn't there. Stop complaining you didn't have a Christmas tree when you were 3, so you shot everybody in your neighborhood. Shut the fuck up and take responsibility for your own actions. We need to stop stabbing each other in the back for bigger crumbs. Institutionalized racism knocks us down. Selfishness and gluttony keeps us there. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I just had an angry black man moment. Let me get back on track. Black male mass incarceration exists so that major corruptions, federal, state, and local governments can make money. Black gold is in high demand. Every now and then, a few black men are rescued by some benevolent white human rights organization to prove that if you can hold on for about 50 years in prison, justice will prevail. The public gets a feel-good story, and these black men are hailed as heroes for surviving years of knives, solitary confinement, dicks, physical abuse, and psychological trauma. They have been given another wonderful opportunity to fail. Released back into society, they are psychologically and economically ill-equipped to function as productive citizens because the conditions that put them in the prison in the first place still exist. Even worse, it is a shock to no one when circumstances reduce these strangers to society to pathetic burdens and nuisances, and they end up back in prison where they are most familiar and respected by their peers. As long as there is money to be made, this cycle of recidivism will remain for the purpose of breeding black boys into criminals to take over where their fathers left off. The shit doesn't make any sense. Ever since we were dragged to North America, we have been victims of crafty schemes to make others wealthy. There is a direct correlation with prison industries and the 2 million plus inmates in America, most of whom are black. The correlation is cheap and free labor. Most of the military supplies and equipment are made by inmates. I didn't know that. Billion-dollar corporations such as Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, AT&T, Motorola, Target, and Dell, to name a few, use prison labor according to human rights groups. States all over America have legalized the contracting of prison labor. Even investors on Wall Street are investing in prison industries. Blacks and Hispanics are being locked up on bogus charges by the tens of thousands to feed the states and mega corporations' appetite for cheap and free labor. How in the hell is crime going down while person population is skyrocketing? What the fuck kind of mathematical equation is this? I thought that crime was a prerequisite for prison. I guess they said, fuck the middleman, just start throwing motherfuckers into prison. Jails and prison aren't only to incarcerate the body, but to imprison the mind. This is the epitome of control. Break the spirit and make them naturally submit to the order of things. My story is not so much about the money and politics and racism that are responsible for the vast amount of penal institutions being built. My story is about surviving perhaps one of the most corrupt, unorganized, and dangerous jails in America, the Baltimore City Jail, aka BCDC. This archaic structure is more than a haunted house of ghouls, aka COs, and goblins, aka inmates. It is an asylum of sorts where human beings waste away. My story is not a story of triumph. It's simply a story of surviving years of worst case scenarios. I would be remiss if I didn't pay tribute to the pioneers that broke down the walls of segregation to create avenues of equality and employment for Black people at the Baltimore City Jail. Like the rest of society, the jail was segregated. Jim Crow was the law of the land until Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Blacks were housed on separate tiers in separate parts of the jail. They used separate bathrooms and sat separately in the dining hall. It wasn't until 88 years after the jail's inauguration that the first African American was able to frequent the jail without wearing restraints. David Hubert became the first Black turnkey, aka CO, who was hired at the Baltimore City Jail in 1947. Geneva Saltis became the first Black female CO hired in 1955. Finally, we started running things in 1966 when Lawrence Logan became the first Black supervisor lieutenant at the jail. The sergeant's position was created at the jail in 1967. I had the pleasure of working with my man Charles Harris, who was one of the first Black sergeants. Lawrence Logan and Herbert B. Parker were the first Black captains in 1972. Guy Smith became the jail's first Black major. Calvin A. Lightfoot became the first Black warden appointed at the jail in 1979. And Barbara Bostic was the first Black female commissioner appointed in 1988. I salute these courageous groundbreakers for overcoming the barriers of racism and inequality. They upheld the creed of integrity and decency in an environment that had neither. They fought their asses off to maintain control and order of some of society's worst human beings. This is their story as well. Finally, we're to the table of contents. I did not think that was going to be that long. The prelude, I don't know how to say it. I didn't think it would be that long. So I'm going to wait until the next video to start chapter 1. But the next video, we are jumping right into chapter 1, which starts in 1991. And it looks like the first chapter is only about 7 pages. So on the next video, we'll go ahead and get into chapter 1 and chapter 2, which takes place in 1991 and also 1992. Okay? So yeah, I'll see y'all next time. Thank you for listening. And until next week, bye y'all.